Welcome back, everybody, to another Growth Support Conversation. My name is Neil, and today I'm joined by Alisha Joseph, who has some really crazy and amazing thoughts on mentorship and sponsorship and what the difference is between those two, and putting sponsorship in action, which I think is great in a great way. So without further ado, Alisha, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more?
Yes, thank you, Neil. First of all, I'm excited to be here on Growth Support. I'm a fan. I always say that because, yeah, I like following Neil. He's amazing, spicy too. I'm Alicia Joseph. I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm Alicia Joseph. I've been in the support industry over 15 years, support, customer experience, success, BPO, you name it. I have probably ran across it. I started in this industry as a frontline agent, as a lot of us have, and I grew myself into ranks up to senior leadership. And so I've been able to build and grow, and of course, having the network and support that I've had over the years to be able to get into the boardroom and the rooms that people are getting into. And my goal has really always been, even though I say this all the time to people, I was not going to join this industry. I was going to be a lawyer. I really was not trying to, I really wasn't trying to get into it, but I stayed and I'm glad I did. I've led a lot of teams globally as well as in-house brand. I know how it feels to be an agent in the front lines, confused, being a team lead, trying to figure it out, being a new operations manager, trying to make sure that I'm doing everything right, and then getting into senior leadership and getting into it with the managers who's like, hey, we need change. So I have definitely been there, done that, but it has been a fun ride. I have enjoyed it every step of the way, even with all the chaos. I'm the author and the writer of Coffee, Chaos, and Customer Support. So it's my weekly newsletter where it is dedicated to us, for us, by leaders in this industry who knows everything that happens on a regular basis with chaos. We either have our coffee, our tea. Some people might have a little alcohol, and that's cool. But that's your preference. Whatever works for you. But I'm happy to be here, Neil.
You said I'm spicy, but listen. So I think it's a really, really great, like, obviously been there, done that. You're really talking about the leaders. I think coffee, chaos, and customer support is generally how it works. It's pretty chaotic, and we need our coffee to survive. Um, I think just as a baseline, to get people really started into what we're talking about today, mentorship versus sponsorship. What is that to you, and what's the biggest difference between the two?
Yeah. So anytime I think mentorship, I'm thinking learning a new skill, building my visibility and credibility as far as the knowledge. So my time as a frontline agent and being a team lead, definitely that was a lot of my mentorship time. So I'm getting guidance, I'm getting best practices, how to communicate, not just only with the customers and providing great customer experience, but also internally, just kind of understanding who you are as an individual and what you contribute. And that's where I think about mentorship, is really building those skills. Sponsorship, on the other end, is you've built those skills, you've made some significant impact in your team, you're curious. I was always that very curious agent. I had curiosity about everything. And I'm trying to make it all make sense to how it ties into the broader org and the business structure. So having that level of understanding and building that credibility based off the work that you've been doing with mentorship, now we tie into sponsorship. So when I think sponsorship, I'm thinking major visibility. I'm talking introduction to people that I may not really typically talk to on the day to day. People who can definitely get me opportunities to grow, or in faces of people that'll help me with my next opportunity. So sponsorship is like, hey, let's go. Now it's time to put into place everything you've put into practice here. Now it's time to put you in front of the faces to be able to highlight that. So sponsorship is just simply taking it to the next level with your career and being able to show what you've done on a bigger scale.
Yeah, so where mentorship is a lot of the teaching and guiding, sponsorship is kind of putting your actions where your mouth is, essentially, and getting
Bingo.
people in the room, right? Really to be able to give them that platform to, okay, here's the deep end. You ready for it? Let's go. And I'm really curious for you, like, of course, as a leader and a manager, we're trying to coach, we're trying to develop our talent pools and our teams to be able to achieve more. I've always said, as a leader and support specifically, my success factor is not necessarily keeping people in support, but helping to develop them to grow their careers in whichever direction that is, even if it's within the org, in a different department or something like that, where they can have those and find those opportunities. And when you're growing your teams, I'm curious for you what that kind of transition moment is of when mentorship stops and sponsorship needs to happen for that next step.
Yes, so I actually have a perfect example for that. This was actually an agent who I joined an organization. They had been there for quite some time and they've been growing their skills as far as a trainer. Now, when I came in, I usually do conversations with people. I usually talk to them and just have a genuine conversation. Now, I know some people may find this to be a little unorthodox. It's worked for me, so I'm just going to I believe transparency is significantly important when you're coming into a team, especially as an external. So I've been on both sides with internal and external, and sometimes coming in an external, there could be a little bit of friction, especially if that individual is like going for that leadership role or they just did not get it, just due to the timing and what was needed. So this agent basically was running training, created the training material, developed how not only the internal team learned, but also the external, our BPO team at the time was learning. So I had a transparent conversation because I had heard and understood that they were going for a leadership role. They didn't get it. There were some communication things that they needed to work on. So I was just honest. And I came in with the understanding of, hey, let's look at everything that you've done. Let's look at how you've made impact with the team. Let's see where those critical areas that you need to improve on, what we need to continue to strengthen, and then we can go from there. So I pretty much lay out this framework where I'm looking at the development as a whole. So thinking about it from an agent perspective, where typically an organization expects them to be from knowledge, skill, and their capabilities, team lead, manager, and so on. And so I dived deep into that conversation with her. And one of the actual things that we realized was that communication, and really speaking the language to the higher execs, to our senior leaders, was one of the pivotal things. Now, I don't know if you guys know Felipe out there. If you do, I am a fan. He is phenomenal, but he kept it so honest. Sometimes in support teams, we can act like children. And I took that. He was like, because I'm biased sometimes, because I love support. This is what I've been doing. It's what I've been passionate about for over 15 years. But he said it best, is that sometimes we need to be able to take some of these things that, we're complaining about, and we actually need to put it in a language that the business leaders, and it matches and ties to business operation and numbers. And so we actually created a plan to be able to have her speak in front of individuals, not only just with the training teams, but actually co-partnering with other teams, one of them being marketing, to actually help her be able to improve her skills of communication. And we pretty much created a timeline of what metrics we should have a conversation about, who should be the stakeholders in the room. So setting her up for that visibility and setting her up for the success of the presentation that she was providing, and showing how what we were doing for the training and how she was building the different training for the agents, how it actually helped with business numbers and lifetime value. And so I like to meet people where they are and take a look at what they've accomplished, how it has tied into the bigger aspect of the business. And then I'm looking at what they need to improve. Once we work on those skill sets, and once we identify maybe in a couple of sample sessions that, okay, this is something that you're capable of doing, that's where I know, hey, now it's time for us to start looking at some strategic sponsorship. How are we collaborating with our teams? How do we collaborate with other stakeholders? How do we get their buy-in? And so I like to make it in depth, just so, and honest. I don't like the fluff, so I want to make sure it's skills that people can definitely use as they grow.
There's so much to that I love. And I think the framework at the beginning that when you sit down and you have that transparent conversation of, okay, what are the conversations that have been happening? Where exactly do you believe that you are? Do you have clear examples of those knowledge, skills, capabilities, really looking at that kind of bigger picture and those connections, and then kind of creating a plan from there is such a crucial part of people's development, because then they can really see, okay, this very specific thing I can work on, and this is what I need to seek out opportunities for as well. I think always growth is a two-way street where that person is also responsible for it. So it brings in a different part of sponsorship where maybe you want to push your team to grow and develop. You want to really kind of, hey, let's grow, let's continue to do things. But what if that person doesn't necessarily want to or move in that direction, where that's a whole different type of conversation as well, where it is that
Yes.
two-way street and people want to be able to kind of go for things. I'm curious, one of the things for example, if you're going from an agent to a team lead, that I always recommend people do in that sense, if they do want that growth, is, hey, seek out opportunities for those. I'll try and help find some for you. And that's kind of the sponsorship aspect a bit, as well as kind of opening up the doorway and getting them in the room. But at the same time, kind of put yourself in the position to be seen in that way. As an individual, when you try to sponsor them, you want to get them there. But if others as well throughout the organization don't, I'm curious how much, as a leader sponsoring someone,
Mm-hmm.
how much stakeholder management do you do kind of horizontally at your level or vertically for that person on their behalf?
So I try to keep it basic and minimal, just because I don't want to appear as I'm doing the work for them, or I'm just setting a script for them to follow. And then if the opportunity comes, now they're not prepared. So they may send me some information. I may critique it a little bit, but as far as delivery and presentation, I may actually just push them out a little bit and say, hey, I'm going to push you in the water a little bit. Not going to let you drown, but I'm going to let you at least kind of feel your way and feel the waves to make sure that you can stay stable. So I try to keep all the bare minimum as kind of in the background. So that's how I like to lead when I'm sponsoring people, where I'll have the conversation. Hey, this is someone you may want to meet. Hey, I'm going to bring so-and-so in this conversation. They have some really great insights, but I like to also take a little bit of a back seat. Because if you're doing mentorship and you're doing it well and you're doing it strategically, in those mentorship lessons, you're providing that guidance. You're providing those sessions where you're actually going back and forth. You may be having someone come in the room and do like a private presentation before actually doing it in front of a larger crowd. So during those mentorship times, that's where a lot of my leadership is more intact and I'm more involved. As they get more into the sponsorship roles, while I'm still introducing them, while I'm still connecting and speaking on their behalf in the rooms, I'm also taking a little bit of a back seat. So if they're presenting, I'm probably not going to get involved too much unless there's something that needs to be an extensive point. But for the most part, I like to tell leaders, when they're ready to sponsor and when you have that agent you're ready to sponsor, just be mindful not to continue to be that, I guess, motherly bearing a little bit. Because since I became a mom, now it's like, oh, I have to nurture everybody. But you have to push back a little bit. And so I take a back end position when it comes to the sponsorship, knowing when to speak their name, knowing when to introduce. But when it comes to the actual execution, that's where I give them the opportunity to shine. And when you're doing it right in mentorship, when you're providing that guidance, when you're giving those playbooks and best practices, that's where they execute in the sponsorship. So it's your time to show what you've shown your mentee and allow them to flourish. So I don't necessarily like to be in the front line in the face with everyone once they get to that level. I definitely want to give them that autonomy to be able to move and build their own self as their leader and what their stance is for their organization.
Yeah, and especially if you're in the same room. So we're a hybrid office where I work. So oftentimes people are walking in the office, chatting, come for a quick question, something like that. And when people do come in as well, it's very interesting because, for example, for me, I generally really like answering questions. I like helping people and stuff. My team is also really good at that. So when they come in and they're having a question or something, I often I have to hold myself back a little bit, like, I want to answer, but I also want to give them room to do their thing. And I don't want them to feel like I'm jumping in to just kind of, but that makes them, it undermines them a little bit if you kind of jump in. So you really want to give them that full room to really show, because they should have those capabilities. They're there, they do the job, they do it excellently. And you can provide that room for them to do it. So I think it takes a lot of active intention
Yes.
as well, especially when you're in the same room, what you mentioned for that execution standpoint, right? Where they're in the same room, they're already there. For times when they're not in the room, I think this is something you've actively spoken about in your newsletter as well. When they're not in the room, how do you talk about getting them opportunities?
So one of the big things I like to do is get the buy-in and talk about based on what the execs are focused on. So of course, when we're having conversations, I'm typically saying, how are we reducing costs if you're like in an internal brand company? If you're a BPO, it's like, how do we bring in revenue? Right. So what I appreciate about just with my experience is I've been able to see it on both sides. And so typically when they're not in the room, depending on how the conversation is flowing, what are those pain points that they're still having? What are concerns? So a lot of the times when I have been in the room with executives, there's always the constant conversation of the value of support and how it's this handling, how is this tying to our business KPIs. And so when those conversations are happening, what I like to do is talk about the work that we are doing. And specifically, if they're worried about lifetime value for customers, well, I may tie in, agent turnover. Well, this is why we have agent turnover. This is some of the issues with certain processes. Here's the individual that has been fixing those issues. Here's what they've been doing on the floor. Here's what they've been doing from a high level perspective. Here's how they've improved our numbers as far as whether it's CSAT or if it's first contact resolution. So depending on the flow of the conversation, which is something I'm still even now learning just in different rooms, you have to go with the language that they're speaking. If it's not fixing the problem, you're probably not going to get that attention. If you're just laying out and spewing complaints, you're definitely not going to get listened to. I've made that mistake. Don't do that. Don't do what I did. It didn't work at the beginning. So I'm going to give that advice because, hey, you have to grow to be great. I wasn't great at the beginning and I've learned a lot. So, but absolutely, you have to understand the language. You have to understand what's important, what they want to focus on, what those conversation looks like, especially if it's a company that is, that is public. So that's one thing too that I like to share with people, depending on the goal, whether it's a pre-IPO company or if it's an IPO company too, the language is a little bit different. Because with pre-IPO, they're preparing, and IPO, they're already actively to the public. So depending on that language, depending on what they're trying to move with the needle, that's where I introduce the person that can definitely come in with some value, even if it's just coming in, sharing some high level tactics to what we're doing. So it's really just setting them up for that next conversation and really just honing in on the conversations that are really pertinent, what solutions they're looking for that are immediate and quick, and then really introducing that person and that subject matter expert that can bring in some of that. So I've done it a few times with agents, not just even in support, but also talking to marketing teams, to quality teams, to even product. And it has definitely helped people who may have that, I'm not sure the value of support, it's alleviated that a little bit. Still have that curiosity, but at least it gave that foundation like, hey, we do have certain things in place that's making sure that it's impacting bigger business metrics and revenue. So Yeah, I just set them up for success when they're not there and just get them prepared for the conversation.
I think these things are all great for sponsorship. And at the same time, sponsorship is one of those things where it's like, okay, we've mentored, we've talked about it. We think you're growing all these skills. It's time to get you in the room and do the thing, which is almost sometimes throwing them in the deep end to go do it. So sometimes it can be sink or swim.
Yeah,
And maybe I'm curious your thoughts on like that's probably one of the more difficult parts of sponsorship is when if they swim, awesome, great. What happens when they sink? What do you do as a
yeah,
leader?
yeah. So those are very hard times. I know I have definitely sunk a couple times. It is not a good feeling. I am right, right. I I don't pretend, and I want to say this because I don't want this to turn into. I don't want to say this as an insult, but more as just kind of a learning opportunity. The transparency is what has, even though it may sting and it may sting for a while, the transparency is what's helped people overcome it. Now, there's some people who may have been thrown in and they have sunk. It may have not went the way that they wanted to. And of course, emotionally, they're like, oh, wow, they're probably all over the place. They feel like, man, I've messed this opportunity up. And so a lot of the times, what we'll do is I'll just have the conversation with them. I'll talk about whether it's something where it's like, hey, this is out of our reign. I've had to have this conversation before. It's out of our reign. There's maybe some politics, maybe some things that have to be done first. I've had that conversation. It's not always fun. Sometimes they may have just came in, was fully prepared and just kind of got stuck over, going over their words, maybe trying to think about their thoughts. And so a lot of the times what I try to do is have that transparent moment at first, whether it's frustration, whether it's just, hey, this stings and this sucks and I feel bad. You have to give that time. This isn't always like, oh, let's just try again and jump in. Sometimes you have to have those moments where it's like, okay, let's take a step back. Let's get the feedback on what they were looking for. Let's hear what they would like to see next time. Let's talk about the things that we need to step back into and work on. So you kind of go back a little bit into that mentorship aspect where there may be that guidance, there may need to be some research, there may need to be some more networking. And then you try to re-engage it in a different way. So if there's another opportunity, maybe this was a conversation in the boardroom with the execs, but now some of that piece has went to the product team and they need some insight. So then we may start again at a smaller scale. This time, maybe not putting as much more in the presentation, but maybe a one pager that kind of just goes through quick execution. So I try to tailor it to where they get their emotions out because, of course, we're human at the end of the day. Let them be able to just process it all, give them some time, and then we rework the structure. So we don't just jump back in. We don't, some people want those fancy hands, and they want to be motivating. We just go back to the drawing board a little bit. Because sometimes, just as anything we do, it may take a little bit of critiquing. We may have missed a couple points or two. And sometimes it's just kind of regrouping and just being transparent with that person. Starting off on a smaller scale, that has always helped too. And so I try to make sure, even if things aren't fully well or if it's not successful, the concrete part is to get back and do it again and not just say forget it and just move on. I've seen that with a lot of people too who could have really been great in this community and just in this industry, but maybe just that one opportunity and not really having that sponsor to really like push them or really like help to rework it. Sometimes they've given up and it's been disappointing a little bit for me because I would have loved to see some people, if I think back on my career, that would have been phenomenal at the things they did if they just had that little extra umph.
I feel it. I think one of the big things is that it comes from the relationship and trust that you've built throughout the entire journey of mentorship as you're kind of building those capabilities in the first place, right? If you build that mentorship relationship, you have that good transparency and vulnerability within your teams and your relationships that you have that chance to recoup and support. I think that's where the skill of coaching really comes in as well. When they have that opportunity, have that debrief, have that conversation. Hey, this is how it went. How did you feel it went? We can actually talk about maybe some of the things that you could do next time. and that's feedback that you can give and continue a little bit more mentorship at a slightly different level throughout the sponsorship journey, in that sense as well, right? Like mentorship doesn't stop when you start sponsoring; it can continue
Exactly.
throughout the process. So I think in one of your recent articles, you mentioned that you really need to sponsor with intention, and you gave 4 steps to beginning to sponsor and looking for sponsorship opportunities. You mentioned spotting the potentials that others don't see, speaking their rooms name in rooms that they're not in, creating actual opportunities for them, and kind of crafting those opportunities, and then don't just stop at the first a go ahead and yes, and just continue to do it. Of those 4, is there one that really sticks out to you in terms of really needing to really think about very intentionally, rather than some things that come a little bit more naturally through the process?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely creating the opportunity and making sure that it's done with intention. Now, a lot of the times in our world, we're all creating things. We're trying to fix problems. We're trying to get the first thing up front that we think that will add value to the organization. And sometimes, honestly, we're just doing stuff. We're not actually bringing value. And so I think it's critical to really dive in when you're creating those opportunities, making sure that they actually tie back to the organization. Not only just with the support team itself, but the customer and the long term business goals. You want to make sure that it's going to create impact that can be immediately seen. There may be some issues with CSAT for companies that are utilizing CSAT. They may having those opportunities and creating opportunities around that, showing that there's been some increase with those scores and showing how those metrics have improved, definitely will get more of the attention. Um, it's really just understanding what's needed in the org, what the next steps are, the long-term roadmaps of the organization, understanding where they're trying to go, and what they're trying to do with customers. And so I think it takes a lot to not only research and understand the business aspect, but also getting in front of the customer and understanding, talking to customers. I love talking to customers, especially those that call in like every day because they just want to talk or they want to say, hey, I can improve or you should give me a job, right? You got those customers. And so even though sometimes they can be a little bit, they can get a little under our skin and irritating, to be honest, you can find some really valuable information from them that you can even utilize, just especially if they're a lifetime value customer. And you can even take that, create an opportunity, voice of the customer, a lot of people are utilizing, and you can bring in those insights back to the organization and to the proper stakeholders that's needed. So I just always want to focus on those opportunities because a lot of times we may just be doing things just to keep busy, but they're not productive and they're not necessarily building any business impact. So sometimes that's probably why a lot of the time support teams get that pushback because it's like, hey, this is great stuff. It's great administrative. It's great for the foundation, but how is it driving revenue? How is it cutting costs? How is it driving us new customers? And so I think out of all of those tips, paying attention and being able to create the opportunity and create it with intention, that's probably the one that I would focus a lot more in depth on.
Yeah, not just to add work just for the sake of adding work so that somebody can have the skill, but really focusing on what is the actual outcomes that they're going to be doing with it, and trying to create that opportunity for sure. I think I also agree with you. I've gotten a lot of pushback over the years of like, yeah, but aren't we just adding work to add work? Like, it's cool that they have that thing, but at the same time, what is it actually really, really doing? Do we need it? And I think that really comes from understanding where the organization is going, and what's important to them, and not just what you believe is just important to support. And I think that's
Mhm.
kind of understanding and bridging that gap a little bit to focus your teams. I have a question from one of my team members who came up recently, and I'm curious what your answer would be, because I know my answer because I gave it to them a little bit, but I'm curious. We got the question from one of my team members, which is, it's great. There some context, new team lead coming into a role. They're taking on the team from the team, which is great. Internal hire mobility is awesome. I love it. At the same time, they're like, okay, I started having one-on-ones and everybody's asked about growth, which is great. And I want to talk to them about growth. I want to help them with growth. But how do I talk to them without knowing what opportunities there will be in the future? Because as a team lead, they don't have the full vision and pure view of what's going to fully come, but they still want to work on those kind of skills and competencies and start that mentorship process from the beginning. So we're talking about sponsorship, which is for us leaders who have been there, done that, have the opportunity to create those opportunities for them.
Hmm.
Mentorship is a little bit more closer towards the beginning of that process and the early stages, which you can do. But for those people who are now taking on new teams or just at the beginning of that journey, how do they start even working towards mentorship in the first place and sponsorship in the long run without being able to create those opportunities themselves per se?
Yeah. So for me, I've seen similar situations too, where it's just like, hey, I just came in, everyone's asking me, I don't really know what's going on. Um, I wrote an article previously too about the relationship between a manager and a team lead, where we dive into that because sometimes the relationship can kind of intertwine as far as the responsibilities and what needs to be done. And so I've seen that a lot, and I've had that a lot. I've even had friction, like me coming in, or myself, like with the leader, because sometimes they just intertwine. That relationship, though, actually really matters. And it's helped me in a lot of ways. It has helped me in situations to realize, hey, this manager really isn't a great manager. I might need to maneuver a little bit because unfortunately we have those two, right? We have that. But then you have the opportunities where it's like, hey, this is a great leader. They're always keeping me in the loop. They're always letting me know what's like high level. They're always talking to me about things that we need to focus on, pain points. I, as a team lead, would take that information and I would spread that and I would share that information and break it down a little bit more granular with the team when I was a team lead. Because a lot of times you have agents, sometimes they get along with their manager. Sometimes they might be newer and they're like, oh, I'm not sure. And since the team lead is a little bit just extra on the floor, it just builds that trust. And so it's building that bridge between my leader, understanding what's going on with the org, understanding what their pain points and challenges are, taking that information and sharing it across with agents. So if agents are coming to me and saying, hey, I want to grow too. Like I just saw you became a team lead. I want to do this too. One, I set the expectation. Because a lot of times, especially if you're working at startups, I've worked in startups most of my career. So everything moves fast. People are used to like, hey, they'll come in the organization 3 months later, they're a manager or a team lead, they don't got a role. It's happened to me. And sometimes it's just really for the business need and who's capturing on. But I set realistic expectations and I'm honest. And so sometimes I'll tell them, hey, what you're asking for, the growth that you want, here's the information we can start working on. Now, this isn't going to be a 3 month process. They may have said this before coming in because it's been fast paced and the business has been moving fast. But realistically now, especially if they're an organization that's trying to structure what their actual teams, the roles, if they're restructuring what that looks like across the board, you're probably looking at a bit over a year or even 18 months. And I've had to tell people that, and they're just looking at me like, really? Really? Like sometimes fast pace slows down. like and for good reason. I'm glad there's some things that I'm glad that I didn't necessarily get fast promotions for because I think I would have been set up for failure instead of actual success. So I appreciate that time. But I think it's just really important to make sure that you're balancing that relationship with your leader. And if you are in a situation where you're not necessarily vibing with that leader, definitely still keep the foundation of work and quality with that relationship, but you may have to maneuver a little bit. Some people as a leader would say, hey, Alicia's phenomenal. She's great. And then you have some people that just like, hey, they didn't necessarily vibe with me. Not necessarily because I was a bad person. I just wasn't the leader for them. And I know sometimes for leaders that hits extremely hard because we want to help people. But the reality is there's leaders for everyone. And sometimes I've had to maneuver to other people just to get certain executions done. And it's just part of the process. But knowing that you're helping with that is what matters, not necessarily trying to take all the credit or just trying to, hey, I just want to help people. I want to always move with intention. So when I hear agents or they're coming at me and then you're a new team leader, I would definitely recommend setting the expectation and setting the line like, hey, this may not be as fast as you think it is, and taking the information that you receive and really having those conversations. As a team lead, you typically can see who's been doing what. So if you take that information and break it down per agent that you are over and that you're coaching, you can literally take at least one or two pain points that you see, identify where they may have that gap, and then implement that as a way for them to grow. So it's definitely small steps, but it'll be steps that at least get them towards the next steps that they need to do to grow for their career. But I think sometimes we come in unrealistic thinking, hey, if I do this for 2 months, I'm going to be a manager. No, those times are ending right now.
Oh, I know, I feel this story. Like I had management experience in the States. So like I ran cell phone kiosks in the States, and I managed a couple of locations. I did sales training, etc. Like all these things. I came here to the Netherlands and I started working at a startup. Great, super fast paced, super awesome. Role was opening up, head of CX. I was like, sweet, I want this. I'm gonna go for it. I'm doing all the things that I have management experience. Awesome. Okay, 3 months. We're gonna open the role. Turns out my management experience wasn't the leadership experience that they were looking for. Very key differences between the two. Needed something a little bit more. Was told not the opportunity yet, but we'll work on it. Took me 2 years to get at least to a manager level, to what was the very clear different expectation from a manager in a giant retail type sales environment to what it is that a startup is scaling. And 2 more years to then actually get to the place where I currently am a year later in that sense. So it takes 4 years across. Like it doesn't always move as quickly as you might want it to in that sense, but that opportunity will be there for when you are ready if you work towards it.
I agree.
I really appreciate your thoughts, and I think this is an amazing perspective for leaders to keep in mind when they're advocating for their team members and putting them in the room and speaking about them when they're not in the room, of how you create opportunities. And there's a very clear difference between mentorship and sponsorship as well. I have one last question for you. I'm curious if there's one thing over the course of your career that you've learned that you still stick to today, what would that thing be?
For me, it's always been serving. And as I go up, I bring someone up with me. A lot of people, there were some people in this career who saw me, who saw what I was able to bring to the table, and they spoke my name in rooms and they introduced me and put me at the table. And so I always keep that with me and make sure that people like understand that I wouldn't be here. Yeah, I have great skills. Yes, there's things that I've been able to implement and execute, but there has been people in this career who has really like spoke my name in this room, and they have served me. And so I always, my first mind and my first intent in anything I do is to make sure that I serve. That's just something I live with. Anybody that knows me, anybody that sees this podcast, they already know will put their stamp of approval. Serving for me is always first. If you don't serve, I don't see why you here. I don't see why you here. You got to serve. You serve the customer. Your customers, external customers, your internal customers is your team. It's your stakeholders. And that's very key and important to me. And so if anything that I continue to do, or any new leaders coming in, this is a industry of serving. If you are not ready to serve, and sometimes that serving is going to be a disappointment, right? It may not go the way you want it. But if you're not in it to serve, this is not for you. But if you're in it, it's a ride. It will be a very rewarding ride. I appreciate the people that have definitely had my back, that have been my sponsor. And I try to bring that same level of tenacity to anyone that I know is ready to go to that next level. It doesn't stop my shine, doesn't stop my glow helping someone else. It just shows like, hey, I've made this impact in someone's life, that they have the confidence now to go ahead and be able to shine, make the money they want to make, have the opportunities that they want to have, and build for their family. So if you're not serving, this not for you. I'm sorry. I will stand on that 10 toes down.
I don't even know what to say to that. I love it. I'm just gonna, that's like a power statement, hit him with the end. I think that's awesome. Absolutely agree with everything there, and thank you so much for your sharing your experience and your thoughts and how people can really get started with that. If people do want to continue that conversation with you, where is the best place to reach out to you?
Yes, so I'm on LinkedIn actively, crazy, met some cool people. Neil is one of them. Like, Neil is like, who doesn't know Neil? So if you guys go on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as Alicia Ali Joseph, because some people do know me as Ali. So you can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to DM me, if you want to send an email, you can email me at ali@savvyservicepro.com. That is the quickest way to get contact with me, or LinkedIn, and we can definitely connect. We can continue to talk. If you are headed to travel and I'm in the area, we can connect there as well. But those are definitely the two places you can reach out to me and learn more, and we can connect.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil. Glad to be here. I appreciate it.